and friends, thinking about them in different ways. Please God, they're all well and safe. And also, as just said to him, for the situation in Israel, also some of these words would be for the hostages. Now, I haven't mentioned here much for some reason my work at Great Ormond Street Hospital, and I'm not going to talk about Great Ormond Street today, but I'm also chaplain at another hospital, North Middlesex Hospital, and there it's very different to Great Ormond Street because a lot of the emphasis, certainly in the work I'm doing, is under what is nowadays called care of the elderly, and it used to be called geriatrics. Now they're referred to as care for the elderly. I mean, it's politically correct what we say, but talking to a number of neurologists, different people, when they try and assess people for various illnesses, they try and work out dates and timelines. So I'm going to ask a very simple question. What's the date today? 3rd of summer. So everyone knows that one. Yes, they know that one because of the outside of the Bavitcher Rebbe. But English date? Anyone know the English date? Okay. All right. How long ago was it when I last spoke at this event?
Too long.
It seems to me it was like yesterday, but apparently it was a few months ago, because I think sometimes we actually fail to judge time, and it's very difficult to judge time. Now, I think this year, as far as I'm concerned, we're still probably in January, February. We're still around Rosh Hashanah, but the time has flown. When I realized we're less than 100 days to Rosh Hashanah, it's scary. It's scary. We've got this time coming up. And it's very interesting because people say that time flies as you're getting older. Now, interestingly enough, there is medical backing for that, because time, it goes quickly because it's a different proportion of our lives. When we're a child, a year is a massive proportion of our life. If you're 8 years old, it's an eighth of your life. By the time you're 80, it's a smaller proportion. I won't do the maths because I can't. But it's that sort of idea that time flies. And apparently when you're having fun, time also flies. So for me, this talk will last like 2 seconds. For many of you, it will be a 5-hour talk. But what can we do? That is the way it works. Now, why on earth am I talking about this? Why am I mentioning it? What is the relevance? Now, if you actually look at this, at the Parsha, it is very peculiar, because what happens, we have chapter 20, we're told very easily, very quickly, we're told that after the laws of the Paraduma at the beginning, the Torah suddenly gets onto the historical narrative with this idea the children, Bnei Israel, the whole assembly, arrived in Midbar Sin, in the wilderness of Sin. And it's said to us here, in the first month. And the nation settled in Kadesh, and Miriam died there. And she was buried there. Now, we know that Miriam died there, we know that concept. But something struck me is that sentence tells us that 38 years have gone past in a few sentences. The last historical event we had in the Torah was Korach, last week. The rebellion of Korach took place at the beginning of the 40 years. Because lots of Rabbonim say that chronologically it happened immediately after the Chet HaMeraglim, the sin of the spies. That happened at the start, and when we were told we were going to have 40 years in the Midbar. Suddenly we now fast forward rapidly 38 years, and we're told, and really from this point on, is the end of the 40th year of wandering. Everything else at this point goes on from really until the end of Devarim. In the close of the Torah is dealing entirely with the final year in the wilderness and the mitzvot that are given to us at that stage. So what on earth happened to that 38-year period? Clearly, these must have been very important years. These must have been formative years for the community. An entire generation, the generation of Yetziat Mitzrayim, the generation who came out of Egypt, has perished. a new generation has risen up, destined to enter the land. And according to various commentators, we're told that the entire nation will now enter the land, and they're now present and accounted for. These are the people, the entire nation's now at the Midbar Sin, they're there. So why on earth have these years passed without any comment, without it even being noted that they passed? We've just got to do the maths and we've got to work it out. Now, very interesting that working through the commentaries that we see over the years, very few of them talk about this. Some of them are aware of the missing years, but they make no attempt to explain it. And indeed, no one discusses the time and chronicles the time at all. So maybe there is another answer, another explanation. And I think this is something that we don't always think about. We were in the Midbar for 40 years. What's the symbolism of 40? Why is 40 critical in the Torah? Now, where else do we have 40s in the Torah? 40 days and 40 nights of the flood. Interestingly enough, it's only mentioned, the nights is only mentioned once. We always talk about 40 days and 40 nights, but in one place it say 40 nights, the rest of it refers to 40 days. It's a separate share, but it's interesting. Torah, yeah. Yeah, where else do we have anything else? 40 days, really, we've got the 40 days, the Meraglim, the spies were touring the land for 40 days. 40 years obviously wandering, and 40 days of the Torah. Now, what's the significance? The Gemara in Yevamot refers to the development of the human fetus. And it says in the Gemara, and please, I don't want to be misquoted on this. I'm going to try and be very clear about what I'm saying here, because I think that there's room for people to make different interpretations on this one. The Gemara in Yevamot says that until the passage of 40 days from conception, the embryo is considered to be Maya Ba'alma, mere water. And from that point on, after 40 days, the fetus moves into a more advanced stage of development. So to the mind of the Rabbonim, certainly at the time of the Gemara, the 40th day marks the critical point in the birthing process. Yes. Oh, sorry. No, but I thought you were going to make a point, which I'm now going to try and stress. Please, it's not acceptable to have an abortion. That is prohibited at any time after conception, unless the life of the mother is threatened, and under all circumstances, appropriate rabbinic authority should be consulted. So I'm not saying that because it's mere water, that there can be an abortion of that. That is not what I'm saying, and that's a very clear different halakha. But it's viewed that there is a more advanced stage of development after the 40 days. So if the number 40 is significant, a critical juncture in the birthing of a human being, then maybe 40 plays a similar role throughout Jewish tradition. And therefore, each time a new phenomenon occurs, a new event occurs, it's units of 40 in the Torah text. 40 days of rain, we had a new event after that. It was the destruction of the old, but also the birth of a new world. Moshe was 40 days on the summit. It gave the birth to a new nation, a nation that had the Torah. 40 days tour of the Meraglim gives rise to the birth of a new devastating reality for the generation of the Exodus. And indeed, the 40 years of wilderness gave birth to a new generation of the Bnei Israel, the Jewish people who entered the land. Now, the 40 days of wandering carries no intrinsic independent significance. Significance of these years emerges as a period of incubation, a time when step by step, you've got a new generation forged through the crucible of being in the wilderness together, that experience they had there of being with Moshe Rabbeinu, the value of the time in the Midbar is determined by the nation that is born and what happens with that generation, by the product created over the passing years. Will this new generation who were in the Midbar avoid the errors of their parents? Will they, being surrounded by the Ananei HaKavod, the clouds of God's protection, sustained on Mount, live in their journeys through Hashem's will, transitioning from the fear of Hashem to Ahavat Hashem, to the love of Hashem? Will the 40 years have done their job? And that can only be answered in retrospect. And as the story of this generation unfolds in the Midbar, after the wilderness years have passed, then we see what's happened. So for that reason, I think the Torah is silent about the passage of the years themselves, allowing us to draw our conclusions about their values after the event. So we always attribute an awful lot of power to time and to time's passage. Give it time. Things will get better. Time heals. Things get better over time. We always talk about that. But really, if we consider things, time doesn't necessarily make things better. It's what we do, and it's how we react. And I think that's something we have to remember. And sadly, and I know I've got a few minutes over time, but I want to just mention, professionally, and I'm sure you have as well, I've experienced many tragedies of families where there's been some form of machlokas. I was speaking to the Chevra Kadisha last week, actually. And it wasn't about a levaya I was involved in, it was about a different levaya. And they said they were talking about sometimes when it's a levaya or it's a shiva, families won't sit together. It's a terrible situation. And I was actually told and very impressed that the London Bet Din are particular, that they want, if there are children involved, they make sure all the children are notified about the levaya. You can't have some saying, I don't want that other child to know. And unfortunately, not everyone follows that rule, but they are very good. But sometimes you get to a situation where families are not talking, and I've seen shivers where people sit 3-4 places, not because they live in different towns, they can live 100 yards away, but they won't sit in the same places. And when the family members are asked, they often don't know why they're not talking anymore. Maybe a small slight, it may be an insult, but over time, this has developed into a permanent rift. And I think the Torah's silence over this period of wandering in the wilderness reminds us that with the passage of time, there's a lesson that we often forget. The passage of time in and of itself is immaterial. It's irrelevant. What matters is what takes place during that time and how those events impact on our lives. And if over the years problems are avoided, reconciliations avoided, problems are ignored, then the passage of time's worked against us. But if on the other time we use our time wisely and constructively, confronting our shared issues squarely and with sensitivity, then time's our ally. And I think now we're in Tammuz, we're close to 3 weeks, close to El, we're close to Tishrei. Let us use our time wisely and constructively so that we can actually work together to please God, bring the Mashiach speedily in our days. Have a good day.
Thank you very, very much to Rabbi Wilkinson. I will end the Zoom for those on it and see you all soon. We did have